listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. This is the show that talks about identity and access management and making sure you know who has access to what. Let's get started. Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff. How are you?
Oh, not so bad. Yourself?
Good. Keeping dry. Like I said, I'm looking out my window at my pond. It will probably be a lake tomorrow. It might be oceanfront. And we got the big hurricane that's going to go right over top of my house, Hurricane Elsa.
Hurricane Elsa is going to let it rain, I guess, is the way it's going to go, huh?
Yeah, I'm less worried about the rain in my particular situation, but we've got some trees that I guess I'm more concerned about the wind blowing a tree over onto my roof. I have a roof over my head, so I don't have a whole lot to complain about, but the trees could change that.
This is true. And I think, from a timing perspective, it probably works out pretty well because I know you're going to be on vacation in a couple of weeks. I think you're going to somewhere in Florida.
Right. Yeah, actually, I'm going what I thought was the original path, pretty close to Tampa. And it looks like the storm changed his path a little bit so that it went a bit north of that. But now it's going to be a direct hit over my home in Augusta, Georgia. It's going to make a path over to Columbia, South Carolina. Anyway, this is not the Weather Channel, so I'll stop there.
Thank you for tuning into the late weather news as you're listening to this, maybe weeks or months after it took place.
Yeah, right.
Timely and relevant content. This is what we strive for on the Identity at the Center podcast.
Absolutely.
Well, I think the important thing is the timing, right? You're on vacation. You're going to Florida. I'm actually going to Key West in a couple of weeks myself. So I'm not looking forward to, being part of a hurricane situation at that point either, but we'll see how it goes.
Well, folks are interested in how the sausage is made. We're recording with Sarah, a couple days before this one will go live, but we've been recording some back episodes so that while we're on vacation, we don't miss our publication schedule. We've been pretty anal about that in terms of getting our episodes out every Monday at 12 noon Eastern time. So, planning to keep that going throughout the year.
Yeah, 2 years, 100 episodes, and 101 is going to be this one. You mentioned Sarah, so why don't we introduce her? Her name is Sarah Cecchetti. She is the Principal Product Manager for AWS Identity. She's also the co-founder, board member, and president for IDPro, which is a lot of different things going on. Welcome to the show, Sarah.
Thanks very much, Jeff.
Yeah, so I'm excited to have you on here because for a couple of reasons, right? So for IDPro, I've been a member, I think, since inception, which I know you founded that a couple years ago, 2017, I believe.
Correct.
So I've been there since the beginning. A little bit of a fly on the wall, but I have served on a couple of boards, one for the board selection committee, whatever. Sorry, I'm butchering the name on that one, but for that. And then most recently on the IDPro certification or CIDPRO, which we'll talk about later. Yep. But before we get too far along, what I'd like to understand, though, is from your perspective, how did you get into the identity space? Is it something that you chose or did it choose you?
I sort of fell into it sideways, which I think is more or less what happens to everyone. My undergraduate degree is in physics. I was really excited about being a rocket scientist when I was in my early 20s, and then got my undergraduate degree in physics and realized that one undergraduate degree is not quite enough to go be a rocket scientist, that you need a lot more school, and I was not up for a lot more school at that point in my life. And so I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I went and I got like a secretary job at a nonprofit, and their website was god-awful. And so I took it upon myself to make the website better, and they were using a content management system based on Python, so I taught myself Python, and then they moved their headquarters from Seattle to where I'm based to New York. And I said, well, moving to New York on a secretary salary just really doesn't seem like a good life plan. And so I'm going to stay in Seattle and I'll take the severance package. And but while I'm doing that, can you change my title to like a technology services something? And they said, sure, that's the least we can do. We feel super bad for laying you off. And so they changed my title. I became a technology services something. And then eventually I got recruited by an identity team who basically said, we know identity really well. This was at the University of Washington. They've actually built a lot of the identity tools that other universities used and open sourced them. And they said, you don't need to know identity. We can teach you. And you have a year to ask all the stupid questions. And that was awesome. And I had just gotten out of grad school at the time. And so the first thing they said was, hey, you should go and read all of the new specifications and like summarize them and tell us about them. And so like I went and read Fido, and I went and read UMA, and I went and read OAuth and everything that was going on at the time. And then I started going to conferences, and I met the people who had written the standards, which was really amazing. And so I got to ask them, like, why is it this way? Why did you put this in there? Why do tokens, like, why are there only Vera tokens? Why aren't there other kinds of tokens? And like got like long involved in, like, normally when you go to technology conferences, people do not have time. They do not want to answer your questions. They will not like sit and explain things to you. They get very impatient with that. And identity people are not that way at all. Identity people are super nice, super generous with their time. And they're so happy that someone has read their standard and that anyone cares. And they will happily like sit in the bar for 2 hours and explain to you why bearer tokens are bearer tokens. And so I got to learn the identity field really well. And eventually people said, oh, wow, you've read all these standards and you understood them. Like, can we hire you? Will you work evenings and weekends? Like, can we come, like, will you come to our office and explain these to us? Because we don't have time to read all of them. And so I said, sure. And I started kind of moonlighting in addition to my university job as a contractor. And eventually I was working 20 hours a week as a contractor in addition to my 40-hour-a-week job, but I was making twice as much money contracting. And so I was able to jump ship, and I quit my full-time job and became a contractor. And my company was called Engage Identity, and that's roughly when I founded IDPro. So Ian Glazer, who runs identity for Salesforce, and I think we were at a bar at RSA, and we were bemoaning the fact that security gets so much attention and privacy gets so much attention, right? They have C-suite positions, and identity like is this third leg of the stool that's critical to both of them. And it gets no respect, no attention. We don't even have a professional organization that identity nerds can join and like learn more about their own fields. And isn't that a travesty? And then like we looked at each other and we were like, shit, we're going to have to do all this work ourselves, aren't we? Like, we're going to have to found this thing. We're going to have to move forward. And so we did that. And we founded IDPro. That was in 2017. And then after that, I spent a year at Ping. And then I came to AWS, and I have loved AWS. I'm like a fish in water here. It is totally my culture and my jam. And I will probably be here for a long, long time.
What makes
that's my story.
It's a fascinating story, especially like the part where you sat at a bar and were thinking, how are we going to solve this issue of awareness, right, around identity? Because I feel like the same thing, right? It's always been kind of tucked under, InfoSec or, maybe audited in some earlier stages and things like that. But it really is foundational from any security component has to have identity in it. And if you don't have that addressed, you're going to have a bad time. You're probably going to be in the news for all the wrong reasons. So I'm glad that you started it. I'm glad that it started at a bar. That's even better. And we've had Ian on the show as well. I think he kicked off our first episode for 2021. So he's a good dude. Definitely will echo what you said too about the identity industry being so welcoming. I think it's one of the industries, at least that I've been part of, where everyone really is willing to share their knowledge. It's not an arms race when it comes to trying to be better or worse. I mean, I understand there's probably some of that when it comes to product, for sure, people are trying to, have the best product out there. But at the end of the day, all the people who are in the industry are very willing to share, information. And we had them on this show, and we talked to them at conferences, and we're going to all kinds of different things. And, people are very gracious with their time. And I would certainly encourage folks who are looking to get an identity, or if they've only been an identity for a short time, or if they've been an identity for a long time, reach out and talk to somebody, right? I mean, I think you'll find most people are, pretty open to have that. And, they are certainly receptive to having their work read and commented on. Otherwise, it dies somewhere in a LinkedIn post somewhere where, maybe not a lot of people might see it. So definitely echo that for sure.
Yeah, and a lot of the work that we do in identity has to do with interoperability, right? So we are unlike other technologies in that we have to work together. And the way to make our customers have better experiences is for us to talk to each other and make sure that all of the attributes that we have are coming across, and that they're coming across correctly and in the way that customers expect. And so identity is kind of an unusual field to work in that you have to work with your competitors. And we have these kind of teams of rivals all the time where we have to build standards together. And so we all know each other and we can all share knowledge. And that's really the only way to learn this field. Like there is no accredited undergraduate degree for identity and access management. You can't get one. You have to learn it on the job. It's the only way.
So I got to imagine that not everyone always agrees when you're sitting in these rooms and you're trying to come up with something that is interoperable between different products. What is something that people might argue about when it comes to integration? I mean, I'm not looking for, dirt or anything, but I'm curious as someone who is not taking part of these conversations, what are some of the things that you guys are trying to figure out? And maybe one organization or one person, thinks it should be done this way and another person another way. How do you kind of come to consensus around that?
So one of the big contentious things, I was one of the co-authors of the NIST Digital Identity Guidelines, which were rewritten in 2018. And one of the really contentious things was that we wanted to deprecate SMS MFA because when you send a multi-factor authentication code as a text message, that text message can be intercepted with off-the-shelf hardware and software. We know that. And so it's not very secure. There's SIM jacking, right? There's lots of ways for an attacker to get to that message. SMS as an infrastructure was never intended to be secure. And so the telco companies obviously took issue with us publicly saying this is insecure and we need to deprecate it, and said, look, we have ways to detect SIM jacking. We have ways to time limit these codes so that they can't be used for very long. Like this is an okay way to do multi-factor authentication, and it's better than just a password. Like there's no question about that. And it's really easy to deploy. It doesn't require anyone to install an app. And so there are a lot of benefits to it. There are a lot of drawbacks to it. And the same thing is happening, like the same sort of discussion is happening right now with using email for multi-factor authentication. For a long time, we said, no, that doesn't even count as multi-factor authentication because it's supposed to be something you know, something you have, and something you are. And if you just have a password in email, then that's something that's protected by a password and something else that's protected by a password. And so you're not protecting against different kinds of attacks. But if you're in a corporate environment where you can put multi-factor on the email, then maybe that is a valid form of MFA because you know that that person has had another factor checked via another channel, right? And so a lot of companies are having this struggle with like, okay, what counts as MFA? What doesn't count as MFA? Does it have to be just more secure than just a password, or is there a higher bar for security that we want to talk about? So yes, identity nerds love to argue, and we're very bad at agreeing on things, and but we're good at moving forward. We do build new technologies fairly quickly. Like the identity field moves forward really fast.
Yeah, I think even phishable forms of MFA are better than no MFA at all. It's funny because I was listening to your how you got into IAM story, and you're talking about all these standards, and people are like, "You understand these?" And you're like, "Yeah." They have to remember that you wanted to be a rocket scientist, and you have a degree in physics, so it all adds up to me anyway. But the other part, kind of the end point of your journey, or the last where you currently are, AWS putting together or being responsible for the AWS Cognito project is fascinating. I mean, I work with clients all the time, and when we're working on customer IAM projects and strategies, the question asked is always, what about Amazon? What about Amazon's customer IAM capabilities? And so that's AWS Cognito, right? Maybe you can tell us a little bit about what it is, who's it for, and all those great things.
Yeah, so the way that AWS thinks about identity is we divide it between workforce and consumer. And it's absolutely huge here. So between the two of those, we do over 500 million authentication and authorization calls per second. So it is just like the scale that you work at AWS is just bonkers.
Wait, you said 500 million per second?
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
It is completely ridiculous.
Only slightly less than what Bezos makes per hour. But anyway, keep going.
Yeah, so the part that I am really excited about and that I am diving a lot of my energy into is the Amazon Cognito product, which is our consumer-facing product. And the reason I'm really excited about it is because I don't think that any company is really delivering a great consumer identity product right now as a service, right? Consumer identity is a friction point at the beginning of every app, at the beginning of everything you want to do, right? And there's no great way to have a end user remember a password or have to enter an MFA code, right? That's always a pain. And so we're looking for, we're researching new ways. How can we make this easier? How can we make it less friction? How can we make it harder for attackers to get in and easier for good guys to get in? And that's a really interesting problem for me. And Amazon Cognito is just a lot of fun because it's a Swiss Army knife, or I like to say it's like a box of identity Legos. Like you can build a whole bunch of stuff with it. It's got a native directory, it does OIDC, it does SAML. We just added token revocation. Like there's a whole bunch of stuff you can build just with Cognito. And so just talking to Cognito customers, our customers do all sorts of really neat things with the product that we never expected them to do. And so we can talk to them about, hey, what are you building? Oh, you're building a castle. Cool. That guy over there is building a car. Like, if we built a wheel, like, would that help both of you somehow? And so we're building new stuff all the time and talking to people about how they're using the product, and it's a lot of fun.
I won't claim to be an expert on Cognito. So for the folks who aren't as familiar with it, you mentioned workforce and customer IAM. Is it the same product for both? So Cognito is both, and then it's just a matter of configuration, or is there something more to it that people should be thinking about it when they're talking about either constituency?
Nope. So Cognito is the consumer identity piece, and then workforce is handled by a product called AWS SSO.
Okay, so we have SSO, we have Cognito.
Yep.
And then on the Cognito side, I guess who's taking advantage of Cognito? Is it app developers who are already building on AWS services? Do you see uptick from maybe people who are using other platforms like Azure or Google Cloud, but then they come in and use Cognito for some reason? Can you help me understand how, what does it look like from a development perspective if I'm trying to layer on IAM on top of my product?
We do. So we see multi-cloud use cases and we see AWS native use cases. And we see just like, hey, I'm hosting an app on like Rackspace or whatever, DreamHost, whatever my web developer is, and I just want to add some identity on top of it. So yeah, we get customers from all over the place using Amazon Cognito, but it's mainly app developers. Yeah, it's people who are building something new and they just need an easy way to log people in. And we call that undifferentiated heavy lifting, right? They don't want to do all of that heavy lifting. It's not going to make their company a better company to build a whole login system from scratch and try to do it in a secure way. But they know that at Amazon, security is job zero. And if Amazon is holding all the passwords and no passwords ever go through my system, I feel way better about that than I do about trying to build this all myself to a standard that would be considered best of breed.
So, Sarah, what are the use cases that Cognito supports today? Is it just the authentication? Do you have a directory? Do you have a registration widget? Or talk to us about what's there today, and maybe a little bit about what we can expect to see in the future.
Yeah. So today it's a native directory. It's a federation service. It is authentication, and we have a service called a hosted UI where we will host your login page, your account recovery page, your MFA page, anything that has to do with user credentials or creating the account, recovering the account. That those you can host on AWS servers. They'll still look like they're on your domain, so there won't be a change in the URL, but it will be hosted by AWS so that credentials never go on your server. You never have to touch any of that. And so the liability of having to deal with passwords and usernames and all of that is taken away from you, which our customers really like. And we're going to continue building. As I said, we want to make this an easier experience with less friction and more security. And so those are the types of things you'll see us releasing on Cognito in the future.
I believe I heard somewhere that you've kind of taken a low code, no code approach. Is that correct? And whether it is or isn't, is there a certain developer skill set or language that people need to kind of be familiar with in order to have success with Cognito, or is it something where you guys support pretty much whatever, bring your own kind of language?
Yeah. So we kind of go both in the direction of if you want to do a bunch of custom code, we have APIs you can call and you can use Cognito for that, and that's totally fine. But we also recognize that a lot of people don't want to do that. Like they want a low code, no code option. And so we're building out more and more functionality in the AWS console that is just like, do you want MFA? Yes or no? Click a radio button, click save, and you're done. Like you don't have to write all that code, and we will even host the page for you. And so there is like, you can have a Cognito instance up and running with zero code, which is really cool. That's something that, when I started in identity, that was not an option from any vendor. And so we're hoping to get more and more people into identity just as administrators who know the security implications of the decisions they're making, but don't necessarily have coding skills.
Yeah, I always struggle with organizations that are looking to build something that already exists as a product somewhere else. Yeah. And I think what you hit earlier was something that I always agree with is, who's spending more on security? Is it going to be, an organization that's doing 500 billion authentications per second? Or is it going to be, an organization that, builds transmissions? I'm going to go with, the company that's actually probably spending more money, on the actual security part of it, because chances are they're probably going to be more successful with it. And it's not core competency or really core to the product or the mission, right, for another organization. So it makes a lot of sense to be able to take advantage of those types of solutions. And I definitely see the low code, no code approach. I love the Lego brick analogy. I think that's something that, that I've seen elsewhere. We see it a lot in like ITSM tools. So things like ServiceNow and Pega and other things like that, where it's becoming more business friendly to configure identity services. But all that does is really masking the hard work that takes place behind the scenes, right? To make sure that that stuff works and interoperability and things like that. And I think that leads me to kind of the next conversation topic that I want to bring up, which is around IDPro itself, because I do think it takes an army of really smart people to kind of come up with these types of standards and having the conversations, right? To allow companies to interact in a safe way through their identity mechanisms. So why don't we talk a little about IDPro? And I know that, just for a starting topic, let's say, you recently were at Identiverse and announced the new CIDPro certification. I know it's something that has been near and dear to a lot of people's heart within IDPro itself, and kind of figuring out, how do you prove that you can actually do IAM work, right? Are you qualified? So maybe why don't we start with that? And, what is this CIDPro? Who is it for?
Yeah. So this kind of goes back to the conversation that Ian and I had when we founded IDPro, right? Like identity is critical to the success of security and privacy, but security has CISSP, right? And privacy has as certifications as well, but there's nothing for identity. There's no vendor neutral way to prove, yes, I know general identity skills. I can do critical thinking about security issues until now. And so we decided, hey, we're going to build one. We started building a body of knowledge last year where IDPro members, who are people who have been in the industry for decades, are writing scholarly journal level articles about identity and access management topics. And we said, oh, we can certify against that. And so you, Jeff, and a lot of other identity professionals all got together and wrote questions that said, hey, someone with, like, our target candidate is someone who has 2 years of experience, either as a developer or an administrator with an identity system. And so these are questions that are aimed at someone who's been in the field for 2 years. And hey, this is what you should know by the time you've been in the field for 2 years. This is what you should be up to speed on. And so someone with 2 years of experience should be able to take the test and pass it without studying. That's our goal.
So I think that's a good target audience. I like it because it's still, relatively entry level, but does require some experience in the industry, right, to be able to kind of come up with stuff, or at least be able to read the body of knowledge on the idpro.org website, which is a great read. So I think if people are looking for good identity content, go there. And I don't say that just because we're on the list as a podcast, but also because it is, there's a wealth of information out there. And I do like the fact that, if you're looking to work through the certification process through IDPro, essentially that's the page that you can go to study, right? There's most of the questions, I think, have sources that come from that area to make it, I won't say easy, right? Because you still need to have the knowledge and demonstrate it. But easy from the fact that you're not having to scour the web, 8 different, websites, a bunch of YouTube channels, however people are studying for things like Security Plus and CISSPs and, things like that. I think it's a good place to start. You mentioned that the certification focuses on some more of the technical and the administrator side of identity. I think there's a large constituency of people who are maybe not as technical. They might be more on a business analyst or process oriented when it comes to identity. What are your thoughts around how do we include those people as part of that? Is this test for them as well? Or do you see a different path to kind of demonstrate maybe IAM as a process knowledge and maybe less so on the technical side of things?
So a couple of things. One is that it is intended for them. We intentionally crafted the questions so that they're not gotcha questions, right? There's nothing that requires rote memorization of the FIDO standard where you must know exactly what string this API returns, right? That's not the kind of thing that we're testing against. The questions are things like, hey, a developer is making an identity system and he has he's getting a token from a federation situation, and he decides not to check the signature on the token because his system works fine without checking that signature, and he's got stuff to do, and so he just pushes to production and leaves the office, right? If you're an identity person who doesn't know that you should be checking signatures on tokens to make sure that they actually came from where they said they were coming from, you should fail this test. And so if you don't know those sorts of things that require critical thinking and understanding of this system and why we trust the system, those are the types of things that we're testing for, not specific gotcha questions. However, people have expressed interest in future certifications and going deeper. So we've had people say, hey, I want to do a whole certification about governance and how you govern an identity system and how the business processes work, how you make sure that all of these mechanisms are in place that keep the system healthy. And hey, I want to do a whole legal certification about what are the legal restrictions and requirements and enablements around identity, and can I prove that I know those things? And so for future certifications, we could go in that direction where we're going deep into one specific role in identity. Or we could go by industry and we could say, hey, FinServ identity has its own special requirements, and healthcare identity has its own special requirements, and hospitality identity has its own special requirements, right? And so we could go that direction, kind of a horizontal direction as well. So there's a few different ways to slice it. And if all of you listening out there have opinions, please join IDPro, join the certification committee, because these decisions are decisions that are being made now, and they're going to affect identity professionals in the future. So
yeah, I think this is such important work, and it's really providing some credibility, or if somebody needs to have some kind of certification to kind of advance in their career, or at least prove some baseline level of knowledge. I think that's where certification can be really handy, and it's also kind of a way for folks who are kind of early in their career. It's interesting, Sarah, because I think in the beginning of the episode where you were kind of describing your background of whether you chose IAM or IAM chose you, I think you said of course, IAM chose me, right? Because folks who have been in this industry for a long time, that's how, 99% of us got into IAM, was it chose us. We kind of lucked our way into this very cool industry. But I think in the future, that's actually going to change. Maybe somebody will have their entry into IAM via a project, but others might choose hey, that's an industry that I know somebody who's in the industry. I want to get into that industry, and they start by getting certified. And what the certification really means to me, like what you're talking about with the signing tokens, those are kind of some baseline knowledge that if you have that, you kind of understand what's going on when it comes to IAM. So I think it's very important what you're doing, and I think it really helps that next generation of IAM practitioner get into the space, which I think is important for all of us to do, is kind of like handing this industry down and making sure that the next round of qualified people don't have to kind of kill themselves to figure it out, that we're, giving that, passing our knowledge on. Um, but I wanted to get into kind of some of the tactical components. Now, if somebody wanted to take this exam, do they need to be an IDPro member? Where would they go to sign up? And, how much does it cost to take the certification exam?
Sure. You don't have to be a member. It's open to the public. You sign up at idpro.org/CIDPro. That's what we're calling Certified Identity Professionals. CIDPro is the credential you get. However, if you pass the exam, you do get a year of IDPro membership for free. So you can come hang out with all of the IDPros. We have a Slack that we all hang out on all day, and lots of people ask random questions of like identity professionals who have been around. Hey, you've been around for 10 years. Like, how did you handle this problem? How did you do this? Those sorts of things. The exam is $750, and IDPro is a nonprofit. Nobody's making money off of this. This is what it costs us to develop and deliver the test. And we're hoping to make this a sustainable program where we can deliver more tests in the future on different subsets of identity. So, yeah.
I think it'd be interesting to see identity as a formal education path, right? I think there's a lot of information security, but building out the curriculum for someone to show career progression specifically with identity would be interesting to see. And I think this is kind of one of those first steps towards that. I will tell you right now that the Slack channel for IDPro is just alone, that is worth the price of admission for an IDPro membership, which I believe is $150 a year,
Correct,
at least if I remember. So just that Slack channel alone is well worth it. And then you get everything else. So I think we're burying the lead a little bit. It's like, that's where we want people to be at, because there are really smart people and really friendly people who are asking questions, answering questions. And yeah, if you're struggling with an IAM question somewhere, there's forums like, I'll probably date myself, Stack Overflow, right? And things like that, right? Where people go to ask questions. It's a great spot to be able to really pick the brains of, fellow identity nerds out there to, answer things that chances are someone might have seen it or solved that already, or can tell you what doesn't work, so you don't go down a rabbit hole of making mistakes that have been made before. So I think that's always really helpful. So I'm a big supporter of IDPro for sure, and I love the fact that there's a certification for it. I wish I had contributed more. I think I have one question on the test, and there's others who are out there definitely double digits, like yourself. Ian has written about a lot of questions. I think people like Matthew Carter and Chris Phillips, I believe, have also, contributed a lot. So it has taken a lot of work to get to this stitch, to the state you're in right now in a launch release. I guess from start to finish, how long did it take to actually get this into, okay, we've got something, let's announce it, and let's let people start registering it? Was it 6 months, a year, longer than that?
It took almost a year. Yeah. I took 3 months of leave. I took maternity leave in early 2020, and I came back in July expecting that the board would have moved forward on this project, the IDPro board, and they had just been super busy and nothing had happened. And so I had cleared my calendar to take leave, and I was like, all right, I'm going to take this on. Like, I'm going to do this. We're going to bring this in, and like, I'm going to launch it at Identiverse next year. So
what happens when you show up at Identiverse and you have that presentation that you gave to kind of announce it? What was it like to kind of get out on that stage and say, okay, this thing that we've been thinking about, here it is, have at it? What was the reaction to it?
It was so amazing, Jeff. Like, I literally did a happy dance on stage. I was so happy we could finally open registration for the test. And everyone was stopping me in the hallways and going, I'm so glad you did this. I'm going to sign up. I'm going to have my whole company sign up. I'm going to have my whole consultancy sign up. Like, we're getting a huge amount of traction for it. So it's just really great to see that the industry was clearly ready for this. Like, this was the right time.
I'm kind of sad that I didn't get to Identiverse this year. You spoke at Identiverse. You just kind of alluded to it, doing the happy dance. Can you give us a recap of the conference? I know I'm definitely going next year, God willing, but can you give us kind of a recap and tell us a little bit about what you enjoyed? What was your favorite session?
Sure. The conference this year was a lot smaller because of the pandemic. And so the people who came were really industry veterans and they really pulled out all the stops. I think they were so excited to be there that the sessions were like extra well done and extra researched. I think it also helped that they had to pre-record beforehand because it was a hybrid event where half of it was done online. And so they couldn't just put in their slides the night before. They actually had to at least do one try run to record it for the online audience. But it was really awesome. There's a great session by Tori Meyer, who's a first-time Identiverse speaker. She's a product manager at Ping, and she's talking about why you need product management in your IAM team in order to have strategy and listen to customers and not just do project management of like Gantt charts and how you get things done, but really making sure you're doing the right things and making sure you're doing the right things for the long term. That's a really great talk. David Lee of Cloudentity gave a great talk on diversity in the identity industry and how we can do real work there and have real solutions and not just do sort of a thoughts and prayers kind of, oh, gee, this is bad, I hope it gets better kind of thing. Brian Campbell gave a great talk on the new PAR standard. John Lettinen did a talk that is actually going to be a book, I guess. He wrote a whole book on actually identity at AWS. So there were a ton of good talks this year, and I think the online portal is still open, so people can watch those. And then normally Identiverse puts them up online for free a few months later, so they may be coming to the internet soon, but I don't know for sure on that.
Yeah, I'll have to keep an eye out for that because I think usually they do have them online somewhere to view. And I'm sad too. I didn't make it. This is the first one I've missed since 2016 at least. For whatever reason, I'm looking forward to traveling and just didn't make it to this one. So definitely next year for sure. It's a great conference. I think it's the best identity conference, at least in the U.S., that I've been to. Not that other ones are bad, but I think this one being so specifically focused on identity and the fact that while it's hosted by Ping, I think Ping does a good job of separating it out, that it's not all about Ping. And it is separate, enough where there are certainly competitors there, and it really has turned into, not just the Ping Identity Conference, it's its own thing, right? And I think they've done a really good job of having that level of abstraction and that layer of kind of separation to make it a little more vendor neutral, which obviously that's what we try to do on our show too, is not do commercials or anything like that, and really kind of talk more substance. One thing I thought was really interesting as we were kind of prepping before the call is you mentioned your fondness for escape rooms. So I think there's a couple of things, because you told us a story about one that you attended in Denver. But before we get to that, for folks who aren't familiar, what is an escape room?
So an escape room is a series of puzzles. They actually started in Seattle, where I live. So it's not like coincidental that I'm into this. In the first one, you were literally locked in a room, and the key to get the door was like in a safe, and you had to get the code to the safe. And in order to get the code to the safe, you had to find all the pieces of the puzzle. And in order to find all the pieces of the puzzle, you had to find all these keys, and you had to do all these solutions to different puzzles around the room. And some of them involved like mirrors and lasers, and some of them involved like literal jigsaw puzzles, and some of them involved like getting a magnet through a maze. And so it's a whole bunch of fun puzzles that you have an hour to solve. And then if you don't solve them, you are locked in that room forever, and you starve and you die.
Okay, so there's definitely some repercussions for not getting things done. And this is, so I guess the important thing, right? This is in the real world, right? We're not talking about a web page, although maybe there's a computer with a web page open, but you're actually physically in a room, and there are puzzles or things and a theme usually associated with it, right? To kind of say, okay, you need to get to this objective or whatever that may be. Open the safe, or find the key to the exit, whatever it may be, which I think is fascinating. I have not done one yet myself. But I know people who have, and they just keep talking about it and raving about it. And it's a little bit irritating sometimes about how much they like it. But why don't we talk about the one that happened in Denver? Because I think it was an interesting story on a couple of different fronts, and I don't want to spoil it. So why don't you go ahead and tell it?
Yeah, so I try to get some IDPro members together at every Identiverse to go do an escape room. So the last one we did was in Washington, D.C. in 2019. And for that one, we set an all-time record for the fastest team to get out of the room. Because it turns out that like identity people are really good creative problem solvers. And so like it's a very transferable skill set. And so this one we had really high expectations. We were like, oh yeah, like what's the record for the room? We're gonna beat that record. And we did one in Denver this year at Identiverse, and the record for the room was 27 minutes, and we got out in 33. So we were pretty darn close, but we had to haul ourselves all the way from the conference center, which is more by the airport, out to downtown Denver. And we were going to Uber, but apparently Ubers are really expensive and unreliable now because like post IPO, they want to make money or something. And but as it turns out, like at 6 p.m. on a Tuesday, like limos are super cheap. And so we actually rented a limo, and 8 IDPro members drank champagne and were ferried to an escape room in downtown Denver, and then came back. And so it was an extra fancy escape room.
So if you need any more
around.
motivation to join IDPro,
That's right.
Sarah will pick you up in a limo and take you to a escape room. Is that what I'm hearing?
And you will get out in record time. There's a 50% chance.
I just imagine this image of like this limo pulling up to Identiverse, and then a whole bunch of identity nerds kind of like hopping into it, and people sticking out of the top of the sunroof, whatever, drinking champagne as they're like, onwards, my OAuth companions.
Swinging their YubiKeys back and forth, yeah.
Yeah, to downtown, exactly, and then they're like making identity jokes the whole way. I mean, this is now really getting into like probably true identity nerd territory for sure.
That's right.
But it sounds like a lot of fun. So, I think what we want to do is probably end up here on a lighter note. What is your ideal escape room? Like, describe it for us and the listeners.
So let me tell you about a few of the escape rooms that I've really been impressed by, and like some combination of those would probably be my ideal. So the first one is in LA. It's on Hollywood Boulevard. There is an escape hotel that has like 8 different escape rooms. And I did not even know this was there, but I was there with my family, and we walked in and we were like, do you have any open? And they were like, yes, we have lots. Which one do you want? And we were like, which one is the hardest? And I forget what the name of the room was, but they were like, it's this room, but you start off blindfolded and chained to the floor. And we were like, cool, we're in. Like, let's do it, right? And it's in Hollywood, right? So it's Hollywood production level. So that one was super fun. And then...
hey, Sarah, are you sure that was an escape room?
Right? You have to wonder when they do that.
Yeah, no kidding. Sorry,
go ahead. And then there's a great one in Austin that we did where we were supposed to, there was this whole cabin that they had built indoors. And so you started outside the cabin, you had to break in, and then you solve a bunch of puzzles in the cabin, and the fireplace swings open, and you're like, okay, what's behind the fireplace? And you crawl in, and there's an adult-sized slide to the next level of the building where there are more puzzles, and so you have to go down the slide. That was awesome. And then my absolute favorite escape room is here in Seattle. The company that founded escape rooms is called Puzzle Break. And they started with 2, and they found that they had groups that were trying to compete to see which one could get out faster. But they were 2 different rooms, and so it wasn't really a fair contest. And so they built 2 identical escape rooms. And not only can you bring 2 groups and see who gets out faster, but it's all seance themed, and there's like this plastic candelabra on the wall that lights up when the other group hits a milestone. So you can sort of tell like who's ahead. So like we went in, and then like we're looking for things, and like there's this like chess set that we're supposed to put together, and like there's one piece missing that we can't find somewhere in the room. And then one candle on the candelabra lights up, and we're like, oh, hell no. Like, they already found the chess piece. Like, we have got to get to work. Like, this is not cool. So I think like some combination of like competitive escape room that involves being like blindfolded and chained to the floor that also involves slides. Like
That's an
that would be
eclectic.
the combination of the best things I have seen.
That's an eclectic mix of flavors for your escape room. I like the idea of the competition part, right? Kind of racing against someone else, or
Yeah, I
maybe another
firmly
team
believe there
somewhere.
should be like escape room Olympics. There
I
needs to be
mean,
a world champion.
this sounds kind of like the movie Saw. If you if you wanted to think about it in that perspective, that's maybe a little bit more morbid.
Yeah, way to end on a light note, Jeff.
Yeah, no kidding, right? I like to keep it real for the folks. Um, I haven't done one myself, but I would imagine that if I were going to do one, I would like something that is like virtual reality based somehow, where you're not constrained by the limits of physics, man. Where there's some component to it where you're able to leverage kind of a bunch of different technologies, maybe to kind of solve issues or puzzles, things like that. So maybe
So
that's
there
kind of what
is
I'm
one of
thinking.
those in
Is there?
Sydney,
Cool.
Australia, and at one point you end up on the moon and like gravity is lower, and so you have to change your whole strategy.
Oh my
It's really
gosh.
cool.
Okay. I think we need to do a fact-finding mission to come up with some sort of identity problem that needs the Identity at the Center podcast to be there.
That's
And we're
right.
going to need we're going to need our escape room Sherpa Sarah to help us with that as well. So I think that should be a mission of ours to take on at some point.
For
Jim,
sure.
what about yourself? What about have you ever done an escape
I've
room?
never done an escape room. I thought about the one that Sarah mentioned where there's a key locked in a safe, and I've got a safe in my house, and I know the combination, and half the time it takes me 2-3 tries to get to get it plugged in. So
Oh, so you do it like
yeah,
once a week?
well, even if I know the combination, I it takes me a while to get the safe open. So I don't think I would succeed. But I think if I was to say what an ideal escape room would be for me, would be something that's almost impossible to solve, like finding my keys or finding my remote control. Because even though I was the last person to use it and I put it wherever, still can't find it.
Sounds to me like every day is an escape room for you, Jim.
It's pretty much true. It's been that way for a long time.
All right, so I think we brought it back up to the lighter note, which is what we wanted. So we can forgive my Saw reference. But before we let Sarah go, any final words of wisdom, Sarah, that you want to lay on us and lay on the listening audience for anything we've talked about today?
Oh gosh, yeah. One of the tenets of the OAuth working group that I have made also a tenet at AWS Identity is make the easy things easy and make the hard things possible. So when you're doing identity, you want to make it as easy as possible for people to do things that they do every day, right? Log in, change their password, things like that. And you want to make it possible for them to really dig into this system and write their own code if they want and make their own custom stuff if they want and really go to new lengths and new heights. So that's one of the tenets that I firmly believe in when architecting identity.
I really like that. I think there's enough hard things in this world. Let's try to make the easy things easy. That's one of the things I've been saying recently is, I know identity can be overwhelming, but the goal is to make it whelming, right? Just bring it down to a level. It's like, okay, there's so many things, so many problems to solve or issues, whatever, right? And you can easily get overwhelmed with like a list of 100,000 things that need to happen. Let's just take it down to whelmed, right? Let's just fix the things we can fix and just work on it in order. And that's how you eat an elephant one bite at a time. Jim, how about yourself? Words of wisdom?
The other words of wisdom I have is, in preparing for this episode, I went out to YouTube and watched some videos on AWS Cognito. So I actually may have known more about it than I let on with my questions. But I'd say anybody who's interested, I mean, there are a ton of videos out there on YouTube around AWS Cognito. So if you want to start that educational journey, that's one place to start. But I would actually even turn it over to Sarah because maybe there's better than what I found. Right? I found things on YouTube, but where else can people go to learn about it?
Yeah. So AWS does an annual conference every year in December in Las Vegas called reInvent. And all of the talks from that conference go up on YouTube. So if you search for reInvent and search for Cognito, you'll find some of the best stuff that our solutions architects and our service team has put out there. And that's a great way to get started on learning.
Yeah, you should see reInvent banners around when Gartner would do their Identity and Access Management conference, which I believe was kind of like right before it. And It's smart, I think, to kind of, have the two. It's almost like Black Hat and DEF CON.
1 year I did both, and I was in Vegas for 2 weeks, and that was a terrible mistake. No one should ever stay in Vegas for 2 weeks.
No, I did it for 1 week.
I like Vegas, but I wouldn't want to live there. I like Vegas only because, when I go, I'm staying in a hotel. There's good restaurants. Usually it's, on a company expense or something like that, which is also helpful too.
The food is amazing, but that's part of the problem, right? You just can't stop eating.
Yeah. Well, or you don't have to go outside, right? You can breathe artificial air for, I think my record is 4 days. I never saw sunlight once in Vegas. So,
that's definitely not healthy, Jeff.
Well, that's what gives me my radiant pale skin that likens me to Casper, the friendly ghost. So,
hey, Jeff, though, how long is the ideal stay in Vegas? For me, it's 4 days. Anything beyond 4 days, I cannot wait to get to the airport.
Yeah, I think I would say the same, but I think that's true for probably most areas, unless you're actually going for leisure, like a beach, or if it's something like you can't go to Europe, for example, for 4 days, or if you're in Europe, you can't come to the US for 4 days because it takes you a day to get there, a day to get back. You're going to want to spend more time. So, I could probably swing a week, but I don't drink really that much. I don't gamble, but I love to people watch. And I'll tell you right now, with Las Vegas being one of the best areas, and actually Paris, France, was another fantastic area for people watching. I could satisfy that need, for several days and be good. Sarah, what about yourself? What's your ideal Vegas stay duration?
I'm with Jim. I think 4 days is just perfect, and then you got to get out of there.
And then you're throwing your last leftover coins in the slot machine at the airport on your way out.
That's right.
All right. I think that's a good spot that we can leave it for this week. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us. I really enjoyed the conversation, kind of talking about everything from an AWS Cognito perspective, but also just congratulations on the IDPro success, and especially on the certification getting out there, CIDPro. So for folks who want to get more information about that certification, you can visit idpro.org/CIDPro. Has all the information there. It's open to the public. You don't have to be a member, which is fantastic. Would encourage people to check it out and try to pick out the one question that maybe mine made it onto the test or not. We'll see. So with that, we'll go ahead and leave it for this week. You can connect with Sarah on LinkedIn as well. I'll have a link to her in our show notes and link to CIDPro, also to AWS Cognito for folks who want to learn more about that specifically. And with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up for this week. Appreciate it. And thanks for listening, and we'll talk with you all in the next one. Thanks for listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. If you like what you heard, don't forget to subscribe and visit us on the web at identityatthecenter.com.